Well, hello, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another Pathway webinar. It's great to have your company. Lots of people coming through the door, so we'll just give everybody a couple more seconds. Great to have you at your company this afternoon. I hope you've had a good week. We're nearly there, aren't we? It's nearly Friday. And then it'll be the weekend. And I know for some people on the call, it'll be half term. For others, it won't be half term for another week or so. And for others on the call, you won't even be off for half term because I've no doubt you'll be in the school. But do you know what? As we often say on these Pathway webinars, self-care is not a self-indulgence. It's a duty, isn't it? So I hope you're able to do some self-care. You're able to take some time off, at least over the weekend, if not in half term. And perhaps when you have time off, maybe a glass of wine or something, maybe you could just sort of ruminate on the topic of conversation today, because it's such an important part of the job, isn't it? But it's not always on the agenda in teacher training, perhaps not so much, which is how we build partnerships with our parents and carers, how we work in partnership with our parents for the benefit of our students. And it is such an enormous part of education, isn't it? It really is. And when it works, it really works, doesn't it, for the benefit of the students? And when it doesn't, perhaps that's a challenge. And certainly for early career teachers, newly qualified and recently qualified, certainly, or perhaps even for all of us teachers who've been doing this for a very long time, building parent partnerships is sometimes challenging. Well, we have a special guest that's going to help us steer us through that, actually, somebody with years of experience of building partnerships with parents and carers. So you know how it goes, and we love your contributions. We like this to be a discussion, don't we, a dialogue. So if you'd like to join in, you know where the chat button is, or use the question and answer button. My guest has already said that she's very happy to have you to receive your questions and your comments and so forth. So it's nice to pose those as we go along. Let's make it a chat if we can. There's lots of people on the call I can see. If you'd like to join in the discussion on social, then we tend to use the hashtag #TheWholeTeacher, because of course, as you'll know by now, Pathway is an online program that supports not just your professional development, but your personal development too. The whole you, the craft of teaching, let's be honest, it requires all of you, doesn't it? Heart and soul, body and mind. And so it's only right and proper that all of you is supported. Hence these Pathway webinars where we have a nice chat and we talk about the reality of the classroom. And in this particular case, we talk about that important aspect of the job, how you build partnerships with parents. And it just remains for me to say hello, welcome our special guest today, Julie Keys, very experienced teacher, senior leader from schools, now working as an independent educational consultant, and has a lot of experience in building partnerships. Now, Julie was one of the people who we were very lucky to recruit to create an absolutely brilliant course within the Pathway program, using the same title, actually, Building Parent Partnerships. And it's great to see you again. I haven't seen you for a while.
I know, lovely to see you. Andrew, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm very good, thank you. Yeah, nice and relaxed and ready to have a lovely conversation, both with you and with our esteemed colleagues on this call, of which there are many today. So you're all welcome. We will be wrapping this up by about 1:45, something like that. Depends how many questions you wish to pose. Depends how much time Julie has spare, but we're very grateful that you're joining us. So I'm going to stop sharing now, if I may, so that, there we go, that's better. And perhaps if you don't mind, for those on the call who aren't aware of your work, I'm sure everybody is, but just in case, why don't you kick us off, if you don't mind, with just talking us through your professional journey to date? I'm sure.
Yeah. Of course. And thank you also for having me. It's so lovely to see you, first of all, and also so great to be joined by so many people. Thank you for taking time out of your day to tune into this. My name is Julie Keys. I always like to say I am a teacher by profession and by vocation, because even though I'm no longer in the classroom, I still see that as my role. So when people ask what I do, that's how I introduce myself. So I've worked as a teacher for the last 15 years, and as many of you experienced the same experience as you, as a classroom teacher, as a middle leader, head of department, head of faculty, and then most recently as a deputy head. And I've also had the pleasure, although up until very recently, of being a trustee of a large multi-academy trust, which I have to say is just a huge learning experience. And I really enjoyed my time there. But most recently, my work is as a consultant, which is very varied. And I work on anything from curriculum design to digital strategy, but also parent partnership and stakeholder engagement, which we're here to talk about today. And that crosses over with my other work, which I do as a coach in schools, because coaching is all about how we have conversations. So this is sort of a crossover of those two things.
Fascinating. Thank you very much. Well, we're very lucky to have you here. And so come on, then, parents and teachers. I mean, we're both parents, aren't we? And we're both teachers, and we have been for a long time. Sorry, that's a very rude thing to say. And we've both got experience of these roles. So the relationship between teacher and parent, well, or carer, is always going to be really interesting, isn't it? Because there's so much at stake, and there's so much emotional investment in these things, due to the vested interests, really, of the shared concern, isn't it, for the child's welfare. So why is this an area that you wanted to create a pathway course for? What makes it a challenging issue for you?
So there's two interesting questions, actually, but the reason that I wanted to create a pathway course on this was, as you say, we both have experience on both sides of the table, let's put it that way, as parents and teachers. But actually, the reason I wanted to create it was because it was something that if I can be really frank, it was always something I was really nervous about. And I was going to say, because when I was an early career teacher, but actually, even as a senior leader, when I knew that the stakes were higher and I was more accountable, that I still found it quite a nerve-wracking experience. So I kind of wanted to do it, one, because I like a challenge, and I wanted to explore why I found that so challenging, and also just to see whether we could make it better, try and prepare ourselves better for those interactions. And I suppose what makes it a challenging issue was something else that you asked, and that's a really interesting question. From the place that I was at, where I just said I found it I kind of approach those interactions with trepidation. Now I try and reframe it, and actually I try not to think of it as a challenging issue. We are just having conversation. And yes, sometimes those conversations are challenging, but if we go into that feeling like it's going to be a difficult conversation, my goodness, I see so many courses that say, how to deal with parents, or, difficult conversations, challenging conversations. And actually, if we just reframe it, this is about how to build parent partnerships, which is the title of this. So actually it doesn't have to be challenging. So that's why I wanted to, because we just want to create meaningful relationships with parents in the same way that we do with the children in our care.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're bang on about you're spot on with the language that we use sometimes, because I think it's how you frame it, isn't it? How to deal with, because we didn't call it that. And I know you were always keen not to call it that, how to deal with parents. That immediately sets you up in that adversarial sort of realm, doesn't it? How are we going to deal with this one? But we kind of all know what that means, because we've all dealt with that. So, why don't we start with parent meetings then, which whether it's the 5-minute speed date thing that we've all done, or whether it's something on Zoom, which obviously we've had over the last year and a half, or whether it's half an hour in the classroom. What a fundamental part of that is listening, isn't it? Do you have any advice on this? On let's talk about the listening part, because you're very keen on that bit.
I really am. I know you're ready to listen. I can see, Andrew. Yeah. And actually, it is my default setting. So talking about listening is more challenging for me than listening. So this really comes from my coaching background, and I really listening is such an important part of it. And it sounds really simple, but it really is not. If you're doing it well, you're actually really actively exercising that muscle in your brain to listen to that person. So the questions that I'd ask people are, when you listen to somebody, do you have an internal monologue that's going on? Are you already trying to solution this problem? Are you already trying to rescue the problem or fix it? And are you already thinking about advice that you would give them? And more often than not, the answer is yes. But if you're doing that, you're not listening to them. You're already doing stuff in your own head that's trying to solve that problem. So are you listening to hear, or are you listening to respond? Are you waiting for them to stop talking so that you can say what you wanted to say? Or are you really listening to them? And that means, are you listening to the words they're saying? When I do coaching sessions, or I have sessions with parents, teachers alike, and we spoke about the hybrid situation. So it could be live, it could be on Zoom. One of the great benefits of doing it on Zoom is that I always have my little notebook, and I'm only writing down the words that I notice them saying, lots and lots, because they're telling you what they're feeling and they're telling you what the problem is. And then you watch their body language and reflect it back to them. And I know we use this phrase, undivided attention, but what that means is there is nothing dividing your attention between them and you. So if you are having a running thought in your brain, you're thinking of questions, you're thinking of solutions, you're not listening to them properly. So that's sort of a real kind of whistle stop tour of listening. And you can look, none of this is brand new. I'm not the absolute expert on this. You look up active listening techniques and that will be there all the time. But just like we know from anything, it takes a lot of practice to do it right. So what I would say is, yes, teachers have so many great qualities around listening, but we are also people who've gone into the profession because we are empathetic, we care about people, and often our default position is wanting to give advice, rescue people, or provide a solution. And that takes you away from listening.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I couldn't agree more, actually, Julia. And one of the things as a parent then, I mean, the kids are older, they're bigger than me, which I know isn't difficult, but they're bigger than me now. But years ago, I think one of the things that would worry me the most, I think, as a parent, is going into school to see the teacher and getting a sense that I wasn't being listened to. Yeah, that's a real issue, isn't it, as a parent, if you're not actually being listened to, because then, ergo, you're going to conclude that your child isn't going to be listened to either. So it is, you're right, I think, to emphasize that first, isn't it? And yet, if I'd gone into a parent meeting and I felt that the teacher had literally just sat and listened, and obviously interacted, which we'll come on to.
Yes. Yeah.
I think I'd be quite reassured by that. So yeah, I mean, God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, and we have to use them in that proportion, don't we? But invariably, I know I don't. I know you're going to say that.
I wasn't going to say anything.
So let's get on to the next bit, which is the other important bit.
Yes.
Which is the speaking part, because one would assume that occasionally in a parent meeting you need to speak too. So what's your advice on that then, to get it right and not say the wrong thing? Because it's very easy to say the wrong thing sometimes, isn't it, when it's an emotional sort of meeting?
It absolutely is. And again, this is, a real coaching technique here. So, I mean, we're kind of having a whistle stop tour of coaching techniques as well. But right. Often when we've listened, so let's assume that we've done some good listening. Still, we assume that when we start speaking, we're going to have to come up with a solution, or we're going to have to fix it. Particularly in that moment, we have a heated parent conversation. It's a little bit challenging. They're upset, perhaps. It's emotionally invested for sure. But then you want to jump in and say, I hear what you're saying, and this is what we're going to do. And I think we jump too fast to there. So my strong advice, and I don't like to give advice, but my strong recommendation is questions. Just lead with a question. When you think you should say a statement, change it into a question and see what comes back to you from that. So, for example, this will be really typical for teachers. They'll know and understand this. But let's say we have challenging behaviour that's being demonstrated in the classroom, and a teacher's come and teacher and parent have come together to discuss that. And you're listening to them and you're listening to their challenges that they might have at home. And then this comes to the speaking part. You don't have to solve this. We're not going to solve this behavior. We need to know more, because otherwise we're going to end up solving the wrong problem. So we lead with questioning. So we might say something like, tell me a time when this might have worked for you at home. Is there anything else you'd like to add to this? I love to open a meeting with nothing more than, hi, Mr. Hammond, thank you so much for coming in. We have 20 minutes to discuss Tom. What would be the best use of your time here?
Well, that's a good question. I don't often hear that. That's a really good one. Because
then they're taking ownership of the conversation from the start, and they're going to get to the bits that they really want to talk about instead of spending 10 minutes talking about the thing that you think you need to talk about. Actually, they might reveal something straight away that just clears up this whole matter. So questions. And then I've said, like, as a little end part, reflect back to them. If you can't think of a question immediately, reflect back what you're hearing being said. So I'm hearing that you say that you find that behavior challenging at home. Is that right? Give them space to give you some more. They will always give you more. So there's always opportunity for another question.
And how do you think, I'll rephrase it. So as a parent then, I mean, I've been to so many parents' evenings, although my wife won't let me go now. I'm just too awkward, I'm too difficult, so I don't go. I've had too many kicks under the table on my shins, really, you know what I mean? So I don't go. But when I did, sometimes I'd be met with the question from the teacher, which would be, so good to see you, good to meet you. How do you think how's it gone for Henry this term? And I'd be asked that as a parent, and I totally understand why. I'm a teacher, for heaven's sake, I know why. But as a parent, I find that sometimes frustrating, because I think, look, I've only got 5 minutes. I really want to hear from you how you think Henry's done this term. Is that fair? Am I being unreasonable? What's the best way of... It doesn't land well with me when we open with, how do you as the parent think it's gone?
Yeah.
Or is that...
I know, I understand that, and which is why I use that opener that I started, which is what would be the best use of your time. It's
excellent.
a different...
So for me, yeah.
It's a different way of doing it. I'm not looking for your reflection. And as you say, like, I can talk till the cows come home about how I think this term has gone for my child. And actually, you know, how useful or valid is that as a question? Because if it's gone terribly, you haven't prepared yourself for that. So why would you walk into that conversation? And if it's gone brilliantly, well, then actually yes, it is nice to hear that as a teacher that it's gone well. But wouldn't it be useful to spend time where they really feel like they would like to focus their attention on?
Agree. And that's why you phrase it the way you phrase it, which is a much better way, because it does mean that for someone like me that's impatient to hear what the teacher's got to say, I could say, well, I'll tell you how I'd like to use the next 5 minutes. I'd like to hear how, and then that gives you license to start talking. But as you rightly say, there'll be others that really want to get something off their chest, and they're not really listening until they got the opportunity to get it off their chest. So the first 3 minutes is wasted. So brilliant. So do you see an important distinction? I'm not reading these at all. Do you see an important distinction between formal and informal communication with parents and carers? I remember when we were doing the pathway thing together, you definitely talked about formal and informal. Do you think it's important that we separate the two? And how might teachers do that, especially less experienced teachers? So how do we steer that balance between formal and informal? And is one better than the other, or does it depend? Well, obviously it does depend. The thing that ties those two things together is intentionality. So the intention should always be there. So even though those interactions might be just a quick interaction at the drop off at the school gate, or you pass them in the hallway, however it works in your school when you see parents, if it's an informal interaction, just consider the intentionality of that just as much as you would when you sit down and write an email, a formal email, because those interactions are probably going to be more frequent. So therefore, they're going to have a bigger impact on the relationship that you have. So you should consider them. That's all I would say, is just definitely consider them. Then there's a professionalism part about it as well. So there's a real interesting balance of wanting to get to know people on a level, so to increase intimacy between you, but still creating that professional boundary. Obviously, that's easier in formal communication. Then another thing I would say is tone and expectation. So with formal communication, I would look, if it hasn't come from above, I would look and ask, are there guidelines around the way in which we write our emails? Sometimes that's left to you to decide on your own. And people have so many different varied styles of writing, from very colloquial to very, very formal. And if you're the user, so I'm the parent, I could be getting 5 different emails from different places in the school, all with a completely different tone.
And it's something that we don't necessarily consider in education as much as they might in a corporate sector. But I don't know, I think that we should consider it, because the people who are receiving that should have a sort of unified approach of tone of voice, even if it's just, emails are formally written, but we have, it's always opened with a friendly question. We have a friendly but professional manner. We always sign off using this sign off, that kind of thing, particularly for early career teachers, when we're sort of sending them out into the wilderness, their first time to write an email to a parent, and it's totally unguided and maybe not checked by anybody else. And we shouldn't make the mistake of considering that early career teachers, because they're all great at technology, are going to be great people at writing emails. They will need support in doing that too. It's a means of communication. So trying to guide them in that, I think, is really important. But I should just say that this is not just about early career teachers. This is just about a cultural thing that you set within your school.
So when you were in the classroom full time, were you known as Julie or Mrs. Keys, or which did you prefer, or did it depend? I was always Andrew. You might not like that, but I was.
Oh, you mean by parents?
Yeah.
Oh, I see. It's totally. I didn't set that. That was their preference. They more often than not. So I was teaching primary aged and prep school aged children. So I suppose the formality was there. So lots of parents would call me if they were in front of their child, Mrs. Keys. If we were on the telephone, we would just use their first names. Yeah.
And how was that reciprocated? Did you call them, or did you wait for their cue to decide whether you could call them Mr. and Mrs. Smith, or whether it was,
I would wait for their cue.
Cool.
Yeah. And again, that's just about reading and listening. That's, you're creating a relationship with somebody, and you're trying to read their preferences, basically, and how they want to interact with you.
I think you're also, if I may say, not necessarily battling, but dealing with the parents' own memories and perceptions of as what school is. Because of course, not only are you the teacher to the pupil of that parent, to the parents' children, you're actually acting as teacher, if you like, in the role of teacher when you're in the room with the parents, and they are obviously, I don't mean you're their teacher, but you are representing all the teachers that they ever had in their education, aren't you? You really are, and you're dealing with that. And I think connecting as Andrew, in my experience at least, kind of just cuts through that a little bit, and you don't get into the Grange Hill scenario. I'm showing my age there. Do you know what I mean? But hey, each to their own. I think it's whatever's comfortable for the parent, isn't it? I try and get to Christian names pretty quick, because I feel we've got a big job to do together here. We're looking after this child. If you can't call me Andrew, my goodness. I don't like the formality of Mr. Hammond, but some would prefer it, I suppose.
Yeah.
Horses.
Yeah. Again, I mean, this is your preference, I suppose, and how. And I think also it's important to understand your position in the school as well. I think if you're the head and you're the senior leader, then you're probably going to have those more challenging conversations. And if that means that you would like to have either, you would swing one way or the other, you'd either say, that means I need to have this, personal connection with them. Therefore, using my first name is really important. Then so be it. Or because it's more formal, I would like to use, our titles, then go with it. Go with whatever. Yeah.
Absolutely. I suppose you wouldn't necessarily call your doctor a similar sort of role, similar sort of influence and responsibility. You wouldn't necessarily call your doctor by the Christian name unless you got to know them, I suppose, and then you probably would. But yeah, it's a similar thing. I'm sure it's not as important as I seem to be. It's just something that was on my mind, actually. But what do I call this parent? What do I call this parent? I want to connect. I really want to connect. But sometimes you can overdo it. I never call them mate. That's just a little, rule I have.
Good rule.
Okay. So can you share some examples then where you've seen in your career when a parent-teacher relationship has worked really well, and do this in whichever order you like, actually, and then of course one where it really hasn't gone well, and perhaps why?
Yeah. I kind of thought about this question. So just to sort of break this illusion for people, we're not just coming up with these questions off the top of Andrew's head. We have shared these questions before.
Very carefully hammered into shape.
Yes, exactly. So I looked at this question when I saw it, and I thought to myself, yes, I can think of many of both of those examples. Yeah. But actually what I wanted to do was take out of that sentence. So the sentence is, can you share some examples you've seen in your career with a teacher-parent relationship has worked really well and one where it hasn't? And I just wanted to take out, what happens if we take out parent-teacher out of it? And tell me examples where you've seen a relationship work really well and where it hasn't. And we can talk about relationships in all ways, platonic, romantic, familial, parent-teacher, child parent, teacher parent. And so what makes a good relationship is what we're talking about. And it's everything that we want from any of our relationships. We want openness, honesty. We want to feel respected. We want to be trusted. So not to be too profound about it, but actually that is the basis for good relationships with anybody. And as soon as any of those elements start falling away, that is when it becomes not a good relationship. And one of the things I wanted to pick up on particularly was around trust, because trust, I think, comes kind of core and central to lots of relationships, but definitely with a parent-teacher relationship, I would say, because I hear lots of teachers saying, I don't feel trusted. And that's either by, management in their school, or by outside influences like Ofsted, etc., or by teachers. I don't feel like we're respected and trusted to just get on with our jobs. Now, trust, if you've read about trust, and I've been reading about it most recently, actually, in some of the other work I've been doing, there's quite a famous trust equation, which I'm only going to just say briefly, which is, it's made up of these component parts, which is trust is reliability, credibility, and intimacy. And all of that is undermined when people start showing self-interest. So I'll just talk about those first parts at the top here at the moment, because they're pertinent to this conversation, which is when you consider your relationship with a parent or as a teacher, which part of that is most important for that parent? So is it that you are reliable? That means you do what you say you're going to do when you say you're going to do it. As in, when we receive the books home, we can see that you've marked it, or we have good communication perhaps, or, you don't muck up on things, the bits that they receive. So reliability. Credibility is much harder because they're not in front of you day in, day out. The children will understand your credibility. So ask your children, what's so-and-so like as a teacher? And get a picture from them when they come back and speak about you at home. That is how that credibility is built. Other than, Julie has worked at all of these lovely, brilliant schools and she's done great things. That builds credibility, yes, but it's not the whole picture. And then the last part, which is intimacy, which I think is so important. And we're not talking about having to be best mates with people. Absolutely not, actually. But it's about, do they have a knowledge of how you work? And do you have a knowledge about what's important to them or what they value? And when you consider a relationship with a parent, think about those things and consider which part of it they need to see more of. Why is it that trust is being eroded here? Is it that they don't believe that you're reliable? Or perhaps they don't think you're credible? Or have you not built enough intimacy in that relationship yet? So then it gives you a framework of, what's really important to this parent is that I'm reliable. So I'm going to make sure that I'll do the things I do when I say I'm going to do them, because that's important to them and that will increase trust, for example. And the same with intimacy. If I don't have that intimacy with them, how can I build intimacy with them so that they have trust between us? And that's, again, I know we're doing lots of whistle-stop tours of lots of different complex things, but that's an example of a model that I like to use when I'm thinking about relationships, particularly.
I think that's terrific, Julie. And I love the way you began that by saying, actually, let's just take out the words teacher and parent. And it's really what we're looking for in any relationship, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
And I love that because it's rooted in the reality of being human, isn't it? It's not a false sort of scenario. It's recognizing the humanity in both sides And it's really what we're always looking for in any relationship. And I suppose the lessons that we're learning here in terms of how we interact with parents are wholly universal. You can then translate those into how, I mean, I could easily have had you jump on a webinar, I know, today and talked about how can we build relationships with colleagues. Mm. It's no different, really, I suppose.
No, it really isn't. And it's that listening really carefully, formulating questions, digging deeper, getting to know people. Creating trust, building relationships.
So let's drill down a little bit more into just, I mean, you knew I was always going to go off piste. Just a quick scenario where, because I was talking to, having some meetings here today with other head teachers, and I was talking to some other heads at lunchtime today about what do you actually do then when you get the email from a parent? I always call it at 1 o'clock. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's at 1 o'clock. Well, I don't know when 1 o'clock is for you. It might be 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I don't know, but I shouldn't think so. But if it's, you get a rather angry email at 9:30 at night, and it's a heartfelt, deep, important issue for a parent, but it's an angry email. How do you deal with that? I mean, it doesn't matter how I deal with it. How would you deal with that? And how would you recommend perhaps somebody early in their career would deal with that from the moment it pings into your inbox?
Okay, so just in all truthfulness, I was having a conversation before I came on this, and I said, I'm going to say all of these wonderful tips. When that email hits your inbox and you open it and you read it, you still get that sinking feeling that
you feel sick.
You feel horrible. So I'm just going to say this now, like we are all human. We all have a visceral response to that type of email landing in our inbox. And I'd still have that now, 15 years into my career, in the same way that I would have done when I was an early career teacher. The difference is being, hopefully I would practice what I preach, which is I wouldn't have my school emails ping at 9:30. Now, I'm saying that glibly because I know full well that I would absolutely have my school emails still on, and I would still read it before I went to bed, and it would churn around and round in my head until the morning time. So I'm not going to pretend that I'm, perfect at this in any way. But something that has changed for me is when I mentioned about listening. So if you're having a conversation and you're listening to the words and you're writing down the words that they say repeatedly, having an email, it actually is a gift because they've written it there for you. So you can actually pick out those words that are really important. Take away any of the insults or anger. Start looking at the words they've chosen to use in there. And then that can help you formulate what you want, what you believe they want as an outcome, and how you're going to reach that together. Keep your mind on the outcome that you want, or that you think is best, beyond just we want happy children, safe children, and children making progress, which is obviously what we all want. But in this particular situation, what is the outcome that I want? And what questions can I ask to try and find out more about why they feel like this? So it's the same as a conversation. Yeah. You're listening, except this time you're reading and you're noticing, and then you're reflecting back. Thank you so much for your email. Thank you so much for your email at 9:30 that made me stay up all night worrying. Thank you so much for your email. What I'm hearing is your main concerns are this, this, and this. Reflect it back. Clarification. We want to know that we've really understood the problem. And you can then just have a holding phrase, like you'd like to come and see you as soon as they can, if that's appropriate. But you don't have to solution it there and then. You may want to, just like in that conversation, fix it, rescue it, solve it, but you don't have to. You can give yourself space and time, and you're not on your own. What else? Where can you look for support to help solution this problem?
Absolutely. And the very worst thing to do is to jump straight onto your email and reply.
Absolutely. Don't do that.
Which I've never done that. Yeah. I've drafted emails and not sent them, and just the actual drafting of them is quite a useful thing to do, actually. But don't fall into the trap, because it may even be that some parents, bless them, would actually quite like you to reply in anger immediately, because they'll come in today with ammunition. But yeah, I mean, no, but you want to try and diffuse it straight away. So quite right. No, really good advice as always. So you were kind enough, weren't you, to create a brilliant course for Pathway on this very subject. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the course, if you don't mind, and your hopes and ambitions for how it will land in school?
Well, first of all, I was so pleased for you to ask me to do it, because it was such an experience, actually.
It was fun.
Yeah, it was really fun. We obviously wrote the course, and you kind of, tore it apart, edited it. No, you didn't. It was
actually one take, Julie, we called you.
One take, Julie. I really enjoyed writing it. It was really nice to kind of research it and spend some time thinking about parent partnerships and relationships and all of this kind of stuff. And also us filming it, in the throes of lockdown as well, just trying to get things. But the course really looks at our role as teachers in this relationship. So just to go back to that question, our role as a human in this relationship with another human, which is centered around another human, basically. So it's just about thinking about those active listening tips that we were speaking about and just diving into that a little bit more. We speak about formal and informal communication. We talk about parents' evening as well, I think, in there. And we actually had the pleasure of speaking with a parent and hearing her side of that as well. And I think that was a really great perspective to understand, even though we understand as parents from our perspective, that journey for everybody is different. And that was really an interesting way. Have you got a phone call coming in, Andrew?
It's not my office. I'm just using someone else's office. Forgive me. Carry on and I'll mute.
So I've lost my train of thought. I genuinely have lost my train of thought. What did I say? Help me out.
I wasn't listening.
How dare you?
I was listening. You were talking about the course. You were talking about how you're doing the course.
And just how we kind of overcome those bumps in the road. So first of all, I wanted people to just really strip it back and think, this is just talking about how we have our relationship with parents. And this is everything from how we do that as a school. And I was actually looking at a Facebook post last night where people were saying, how can we increase parental engagement? We really want to. And I think this is particularly pertinent. We haven't spoken about it post-COVID, I don't know if we can call this, but through the period of COVID, where we have this insight into our children's home, and then children's home had insight into what it was like to be a teacher. So we have this, we hope we have this new found appreciation, but memories fade pretty quickly on both sides. And also that emphasis on parental engagement, and the Facebook post I was looking at yesterday, because I love to read comments that and things that people are doing in school right now to try and increase that as a school body. So anything from inviting them in at the end of the day, inviting them on trips. So it doesn't all have to be business. That's that increasing of intimacy. Would you like to come on a trip with us? We'd love to have you with us. And they get to see a bit of the workings of school, albeit outside of the school environment. Inviting experts into your school, having book looks at the end of a term just before drop off so that they can come into this classroom environment, COVID permitting, workshops, etc. But also just emphasizing that this is something that you would like the school has as an aim, because we know from looking at the evidence that actually parental engagement really improves outcomes for children. So this is important. And I believe there's an EEF paper on this. So if anyone who's watching wants to look that up, you can. But just thinking about that intentionally, how do we do this as a school? And then coming down to your level as a teacher, what are my interactions like, informal and formal? What's the intentionality behind them? How can I improve that? Then some real crux about the skills that we're going to build. So our listening and speaking skills around that. And then just thinking about our own preserving ourselves as professionals. We have lots of vested relationships. It's an emotional job. So it's about sort of how we protect that. But I think it's about increasing self-confidence. So I know that one of the second part of that question was about hopes and ambitions for its impact. And for me, it's really simple. It's three things. I hope that this course increases self-awareness for teachers. I hope that it increases self-confidence around these interactions. And I hope that it increases self-leadership. And it's those three things.
Terrific. Absolutely terrific. Thank you. Well, I'm absolutely sure it will, having done the course with you and watched it and read all the brilliant words that you wrote and those coaching questions for reflection, I've no doubt it will have exactly that impact, actually. And it's exactly what Pathway's about, isn't it? Which is empowering the teacher, putting them in control.
Yeah.
Guy Dudley, brilliant Guy Dudley, head of advice at the NHT, who's done some terrific stuff within Pathway, the Advice Hub. His mantra really is, it's about putting the teachers and the head teachers in control, back in control again. And this can be quite a disempowering sort of area of the job, can't it? So I think it would be a very empowering course. And it's fun. I mean, we went to somebody's actual house and we sat down with a real parent and we chatted as parents, didn't we? Do you remember?
Yeah, it was lovely.
Well, her son watched, which was really
yes.
Really yeah, it was great. So we've had a question in from Jamie just before we draw it to a close, if that's okay. So the question is as follows: what advice would you have for recording conversations with parents and sharing this? For example, following on from tricky discussions with parents, I've experienced parental feedback that they are, as parents, told that the teacher will follow up, but that they don't get to find out what the follow-up actually was. So yeah, a couple of different issues there. The idea of recording, which we can knock over, and then also this idea of follow-up, which is so important. And perhaps that was the reason for his question for recording it in the first place. But because maybe some parents might have a different interpretation as to what you're going to do than what you actually are going to do. So what do we think about that?
Okay, that's it's interesting. There is a lot, and if I can just if I start from the bottom and work back up, because recording is an interesting one anyway. But so around the follow-up part. So remember when we were talking about trust, and we were talking about those different elements, and this for me falls into the reliability part. You say you're going to do something, and therefore I want to know when you've done it and what it was. Now, we know that there are times, and I know particularly, Jamie, perhaps I'm making an assumption. Jamie's just added, I was referring to recording as in a written log or email, not audio recording. Okay, good clarification. Thank you very much, Jamie.
Well,
so we're talking about that reliability piece, which is, I want to know what you've done. Now that is a really, it's a tricky one that I've grappled with, because as a parent, I completely understand this. So let's say it's a situation where my child has got hurt on the playground by another child. And the action, as far as I can tell, was intentional. It wasn't an accident. So I'm being reassured by school that action will be taken and we're following our behaviour policy and we will follow it up. But they're not going to discuss what that follow-up was. And sometimes I felt like when I was a senior leader, that some parents were never satisfied with that. In fact, actually, probably in reality, they weren't satisfied even if I'd brought the child into the office and publicly shamed them in assembly. That wouldn't have been enough. Nothing would have been enough. Now, so there's one part about reliability, which is keeping them in the loop about what it is you're going to do, and being really clear. So if you say that you're going to follow it up and you will let them know, making sure that you do tell them when you have done that. Now, the second part is, do you tell them what it is that you've done? And sometimes that's not appropriate. So you're going to have to find a way to frame that makes them understand why it is not appropriate to share that with them. And again, perhaps I don't have the answers completely for this. And so, Jamie, I apologize in advance because sometimes it's quite specific to particular situations. Yep. But again, if we're going to follow my model, which was really listening, what is it that they really want from this? Essentially, sometimes it's kind of retribution, like my child has been hurt and therefore I want to make sure that other child knows what they've done. But there's something that you can kind of lead with questioning again when you're responding to them. What would be the best way for us to move forward with this? I want to keep you in the loop about what I'm doing. However, I can't share with you the precise conversation I've had with that child. When I feed back with you to let you know that I've followed this up, would that be enough? Or, just kind of having be brave enough to open up that conversation rather than shutting the door straight away and saying, I'm not sharing what I'm doing with that child. It's not for me to do. Because it immediately feels like to this parent, like, hang on a minute, my child got hurt by that child and I'd like to know what you're going to do about it.
And I don't want to wait until the next parent evening to hear about it.
And I don't want to wait. I want to know because, look, everybody wants to know that their child is safe, happy, making progress, in that order. So if it's something that we feel like our child's safety is at risk as a parent, that is, alarm bells. Why do I want to send my child in tomorrow if I know that you're not going to follow this up? So you need to cut that out. I will follow it up and I will let you know when I've done it.
Okay, brilliant, full answer. Thank you so much.
Yeah, sorry. And Jamie said about recording. I just wanted to.
Yep.
Do we have time to talk about that?
Yeah, but just a quick one. Yeah, sure.
Again, yes. So thank you for the clarification, as in a written log or email. I always think a summary email is really good, just because, again, it's the same way that you're keeping that communication going. Thank you so much for coming in to see me today, Mr. Hammond. So that we're clear, the points that we covered in this meeting were, and the agreed outcomes or actions were. And just so you've got that record, but just also be aware that as soon as you put something in writing, that can be kept, a good point. Stored, shared, etc. I'll just say that.
A good point. Yeah, no, such a good point. Gosh, we could go on for ages because you've got so much to offer. Thank you so much. Some really, really insightful thoughts there. And I would urge people to look at the Building Parent Partnerships program within the Pathway program itself, because it's a cracking course. It really is. It's really empowering. And how can people get hold of you, Julie, if they wish to? Because we can share something in the chat if people want to get hold of you.
Look, we can already see that Bobby is already onto it. So yes,
isn't she brilliant? She's always on it. I mean, that's just amazing.
Excellent.
Look how quick that is. So Instagram, LinkedIn, and the website. Cracking name, by the way, the educational consultant. Hey, how you managed to get that?
And I got the educational coach as well. Look at that.
Wow.
I know.
It's I think you need to put in capital letters, the educational coach.
I know.
Theeducationalconsultant.co.uk, and obviously you can reach out to Julie on LinkedIn and on Instagram as well using those same hashtags. So that's absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much. I'm sure you'll be inundated. I know I'm very keen to get you in to be coaching my staff. That's certainly the case. So thank you ever so much, and I will do, in fact, actually. So we'll see each other soon. Yeah, we'll see each other soon. Thank you so much again, Julie. Really, really kind of you to give up an hour of your time today. Enjoy the rest of your evening and have a good weekend.
Thank you. You too.
Take some time off.
Yeah, I will.
Thank you very much. Well, for those still on the call, I'm just going to share my screen just briefly and just tell you about some of the webinars that are coming up soon, which is brilliant. That was a terrific conversation with Julie, wasn't it? As always, as I knew it would be, actually. As I knew it would be. So coming up, we have, I'll just go back. We have changing the narrative around professional development with the brilliant Kirsten Marriott, who's a very experienced head teacher at Hemmingford Grey Primary School and has some absolutely terrific thoughts on how she is actually developing staff, both professionally and personally, at her large primary school in Cambridgeshire. So that's going to be really interesting. And Kirsten's terrific fun to talk to. So we're going to have some really interesting discussions about the highs and lows of where CPD has gone well and perhaps some where it hasn't and why. And so that'll be a lovely reflective sort of conversation. You're very welcome to join us for that. We'd love to have your thoughts as well. We'll actually be joined by Kirsten's deputy, Danielle Jones, as well. So it'll be the three of us actually having a discussion about how they're changing the narrative about professional development in their school. Don't miss that one. It's going to be terrific on the 9th. And then a month later, well, it's the brilliant Guy Dudley again, isn't it? How could we possibly go another month or so without speaking to Guy? Absolutely essential listening, advice for the current times. Many people on the call will be familiar with Guy. He's the bat phone. I mean, really, when the call from Commissioner Gordon goes up, Guy answers the call. Head of advice at the NEHT and font of all knowledge, and keeps us, as he would say himself, keeps us in control, puts us back in control in leadership roles. So join Guy and myself on the 9th of December for another chat. That'll be 4:00, same time, for advice for the current times. Where we'll be presenting all the latest statutory changes and guidance and so forth. Guy keeps us on the straight and narrow. So I hope to see you then for that. And in the meantime, if you want to find out anything else about the pathway, please do. You could actually, I meant to put the actual URL on there, but I'm sure it's in the chat, which I think Bobby's probably put into the chat already. Oh, there it is, discoveryeducation.co.uk/pathway. If you visit that website there, you'll be able to find out much more about the Pathway programme and join us on social using the hashtag #TheWholeTeacher. Right, I think that is about it. We're good for time. Good. So enjoy the rest of your evening. I hope Friday goes well. And most importantly, I hope you're able to have some time off over the weekend. And we'll see you on the 9th of November for that discussion with Kirsten Marriott. Okay, look forward to seeing you then.